The BBC have been on a roll lately, haven't they? Now, their bias has always been palpable, but since that American druggie died, it's like they've been having a competition with CNN to see who can provide the radical left with the best rim job. It's unbelievable. But if we're lucky, this is actually evidence that they know they're on borrowed time. So nobody's watching. Trust is at a record low. They're going to be defunded, and they're lashing out. I mean, this is just Custer's last stand at this point. I mean, everyone hates us. The game's up, and much like a dying whale, all that's left to do is emit one last pulsating groan. No! Black Lives Matter! I mean, that's what I'm hoping. Anyway, I mean, what else could explain the idiotic idea to drop songs like Rule Britannia and Land of Hope and Glory from the Proms, Britain's annual and foremost celebration of classical music and culture? Something nobody asked for. Everyone's against. Well, I say everyone. There is a man, and I use that noun with some trepidation, by the name of Femi Oluwole, who's sort of like a political rent-a-gimp. You know, if you've got a stupid idea that's subversive and radically unpopular, give him a call and he'll promote it for you, especially if it allows him to take a pop at Boris Johnson, who had this to say on the BBC's recent deliberation.
If it is correct, which I cannot believe that it really is, but if it is correct that the BBC is saying that they will not sing the words of Land of Hope and Glory and Rule Britannia as they traditionally do at the end of last night of the Proms, I think it's time we stopped our cringing embarrassment about our history, about our traditions and about our culture, and we stop this general bout of self-recrimination and wetness.
What an obvious and boring comment. I mean, so uncontroversial that Femi is going to pick a fight with Nigel Farage over it. I mean, would you like to see a lion rape a sheep? Of course you would. Voici.
Well, let's get reaction to all of that. We're joined by political campaigner Femi Oluwole and Nigel Farage on this. Femi, first of all, what do you make of what the Prime Minister had to say on this subject?
Well, he's essentially saying that given that the main reason why people are upset about this song, a very specific group of people, namely the BBC for some reason, is the issue that it says Britain ruled the waves and never ever shall be slaves. He's talking about the slave trade, and he's saying we shouldn't be embarrassed about that. It's essentially him just trying to provoke a culture war to distract from everything he's done, his own fact that he himself said that the problem in Africa is not that we were once in charge, but that we're not in charge anymore.
Wow, based Boris? What happened to that guy?
And what's this poor chap here?
He's a type of macaque, but...
Yeah.
Boris, we could
Lay it back better.
Yeah, he's right about that, Femi. But hang on a minute. I love this fresh tactic of unleashing anarchy on the Western world. I mean, in the last few months, we have seen political movements, which people like Femi publicly support, engage in activity of the most criminal kind: rioting, looting, smashing up private property, attacking the police, vandalizing cultural monuments. And yes, most of this is happening in the States, and I stare across the pond from time to time, and look, I just don't know what the fuck you're gonna do, guys. I mean, seriously, some of this footage, it could be from Syria. It's as if somebody forgot to lock the local zoo and all the animals escaped over the weekend or something. I mean, honestly, it's like something out of Jurassic Park. And then, when a conservative voice pipes up to say, guys, we don't really agree with this, can you stop? They get accused of provoking a culture war. Brilliant.
It's essentially him just trying to provoke a culture war to distract from everything he's done.
So the BBC has joined the chorus of public institutions waging war on British identity, whether it be our museums removing busts of their founders for the crime of living 300 years ago, or universities rewriting history with the express purpose of delegitimizing patriotism. Boris objects, finally, and he's meant to be the aggressor. This is like a battered wife answering back, and the judge sentencing her. I mean, is anyone falling for it?
He's just trying to provoke people. He knows that it plays well to his base. He knows that he can use this to say they're coming after your culture and stir up people. But this idea that the BBC is somehow leading the march for racial equality when it took them 2 weeks to apologize for a news presenter using the N-word on a live news broadcast.
That's not what I asked you.
Oh no, not the N-word. That's like saying Voldemort out loud, isn't it? You know, David Lammy, who's another race-hustling Goomba, in response to that controversy, described the N-word as probably the most offensive word in English. What kind of person categorizes English words by order of offense? Grow up, you fucking baby. Let's ignore the fact that the BBC used that word in the context of a news programme to describe an alleged attack against a black person. So, if anything, they were trying to whip up the Black Lives Matter movement again and give them something else to complain about. But you're so clueless that you don't even realise when the media's on your side. Anyway, weren't we supposed to be talking about the Proms?
Asked you is, what do you think of what he's had to say about Rule Britannia? You're telling me why you think he said it, but from your point of view, and I think the audience at home will just like to know, what is your particular problem with the lyrics of Rule Britannia?
Well, to be honest, I don't watch the Proms. Most people don't really care about that song because we almost never sing it. But as for that song specifically...
He hasn't thought this through. Can you tell? Right, we're in dangerous territory now. Femi is about to develop an argument on the fly, which can be a mistake even for the most seasoned and sensible commentator. Lord knows what's about to come out of this Muppet's mouth.
It was written at the time that the UK was actively engaged in the slave trade, selling people across the waves, selling black slaves. So they were singing about how we ourselves will never be slaves. If I were to use an analogy, can you imagine if a rapist, and this is not an exaggeration because slavery involved a lot of rape, if a rapist wrote a song about how he himself had never been raped, would you sing that song? No, because you know that song would be bragging about that rapist's position at the top of the food chain.
You know, I hate being right all the time. How embarrassing. If George Soros is listening, by the way, I'd ask for your money back, mate, because this guy is robbing you blind. How easy is it to not sound like a total prat when answering that question? How easy is it to say, well, I think that Rule Britannia is very much a song of a bygone era, really. It's clearly jingoistic and imperialistic in sentiment, and apart from that, it just doesn't ring true anymore. Rule Britannia? Britannia rule the waves? Given the number of migrants crossing the channel in dinghies as of late, it's quite evident that we don't even rule the waves around our own island, let alone anywhere else. As Mr. Farage knows all too well. I mean, that's how you do it. Now, I think there are rebuttals to each of those points, but that's a much better fist of things than this demented rape analogy. Fuck me. Rule Britannia was written in 1740, right? At a time when hundreds of Britons were being seized annually by Barbary pirates and sold into slavery. So yes, Britons were rape victims, Femi, to follow your logic, and in a broader sense, that's the context from which the song emerged. It's about a people standing up and saying, right, if the world is going to be a game of empire, we're not going to lose it to the French or the Spanish or the North Africans. We're going to win, because with victory comes security and the opportunity to spread our values, which we believe to be worth spreading, obviously. But because people like Femi only have one mode when it comes to history, everything must be seen through the lens of the blacks. And if the British Empire oppressed some black people somewhere at some point in time, that becomes our entire identity now. It's madness.
He would never sing that.
Let's get reaction from Nigel Farage now on all of this. Is Femi's offence justified?
Look, first things first, I'm very pleased Boris Johnson said what he did. He's been rather silent for a long time. And the BBC have got this hopelessly wrong. The overwhelming majority of people in this country who care about this want the Proms to be as they've always been. As for the song itself, well, the song Rule Britannia is about the fight for liberty. It's about this country, ever since Viking invasions and King Alfred. And of course, pretty relevant when you think that 80 years ago today, we were engaged in the Battle of Britain, which if we hadn't won, the whole of Europe would have been Nazi for decades and decades. So we have always been about liberty. And I make this point to Femi. Rather than constantly attacking everything this country has ever stood for, can we agree that it's a very good thing that Britain did rule the waves, because for 50 years in the 1800s, it was the British Navy that got rid of the slave trade when all the other countries wanted to continue it. We are the one country in the Western world that fought hard at massive cost in money and lives to get rid of the slave trade. And why don't we celebrate that fact?
Femi, what do you make of that it was actually the Navy that helped stop the slave trade? A lot of people have coming back with that argument.
Well, that's an objective fact, so I don't know how he's going to argue the toss here. But Nigel is quite right. Rule Britannia is a pro-liberty, anti-slavery anthem. And why not sing it through a modern lens? So we could say, right, Britain of the 1700s wanted liberty for herself, but didn't care enough about according that privilege to everybody else. But now, she does, right? Now, it's been centuries since slavery was abolished, and we have expanded our definition of a free man to include everyone, regardless of their racial background. We don't even need to change the lyrics. We just need to think about them with a modified perspective. Now, what's difficult about that?
To be honest, I'm not really going to spend a lot of time on this argument that we needed to engage in slavery in order to end slavery. And I'm going to point out the fact that, as Nigel Farage just said, he's saying that we're coming after a culture. This is what they're doing. People marched in the streets about Black Lives Matter. Not one of the people was marching about Rule Britannia. They wanted to introduce blind CVs, because right now Oxford research shows that people with ethnic-sounding names have to send between 70 and 90% of our applications to get a job offer.
Is that not a
that
point?
Is not what that is not the issue here.
But Femi, is that the point? Is that people are saying, why are we wasting time trying to rewrite history? The points you make are very valid. There are so many bigger issues now moving forward, particularly fighting racism and getting people's understanding and awareness. And here we are spending all this time talking about something that was in history that we can't rewrite, we can't change. We can move forward and change it.
You make a very good point that we shouldn't be spending all this time talking about it. But every time I mention the things we should be talking about, I keep getting shut down.
Yes, because you were booked on this show today to talk about your objections to Rule Britannia and Land of Hope and Glory. Now, if you don't have objections to them, let us know. Would you allow them still to play out, or do you think they should be banned?
This is pathetic. He's now being filleted by the host of the show. I don't even need to be here. Imagine going on a television programme and complaining about the topic you agreed to discuss. So, let's say we believe him, and he doesn't really care about the proms. Well, then you had a number of options, Femi. When they invited you, you could have said, thanks but no thanks, right? I'm busy fighting the great CV crusade of 2020. Leave me in peace. Or you could have come on and said straight away, I don't object to these songs being sung, actually. This is a storm in a teacup, and sure, I don't like them personally, but if they bring joy to others, it's tradition, and I've got bigger fish to fry. But you didn't do either of those things because you want to have your cake and eat it. You want to agree with the BBC and then complain that anyone who reacts to your position is wasting time and trying to distract from the key issues.
I was booked on this show to talk about the reasons why this song is an issue. And the reason why this song is an issue, especially in the context we're all living through it in terms of Black Lives Matter, is because it's a distraction. Now, I'm going to explain to you why it's a distraction. It is a distraction because these people want to distract from the fact that Boris Johnson, with his majority of MPs, could do things to address systemic racism.
But these people are the BBC, Femi. God, it's so frustrating. Everything's backwards with you. And this warped logic reminds me of what we've seen to some extent unfold with the Kyle Rittenhouse case in Wisconsin, right? I've been following it a little as my friend, actual justice warrior, made a great video on the potential legalities at play there. And there are people commenting on this situation who want to pretend that the justification of self-defense doesn't exist, and that if you're being aggressed upon by an armed mob and decide to protect your person, you're the problem now. And this is basically what Femi's doing here, right? The BBC started this. The BBC decided to make this an issue in light of the Black Lives Matter movement, and the rest of us are just reacting, including Boris Johnson. They drew first blood. And if Femi had any integrity whatsoever, he'd be saying, BBC, I'm calling you out. This is not what we asked for. You're not helping us. In fact, you're distracting from the real objectives of our movement and adding fuel to the opponent's fire. So reinstate the songs with the lyrics and stop pissing about, right? But he can't do that because he can't help himself, you understand. It has to be our fault. It has to be the fault of the Conservatives, the fault of the Patriots, the fault of the people who are simply defending themselves and their culture.
He could introduce blind CVs. Instead, they want Boris Johnson is saying we shouldn't be embarrassed about slavery. Nigel Farage spends his weekends in a boat in the Channel shouting at asylum seekers.
I would just like to take this opportunity to salute Nigel Farage for spending his weekends in a boat in the Channel and shouting at asylum seekers. Thank you.
They want to distract you from the things that they've done. Boris Johnson caused the highest excess death rate in all of Europe. Nigel Farage is the reason why at the end of October, we're not only going to be facing an end of furlough, but we're also going to be facing at the end of the Brexit negotiations.
Let's hear Nigel.
But it's very interesting, isn't it, that people like Femi, who were opposed to the result of the referendum, wanted it to be overturned, are the same people who want to denigrate this country, not just its history, but its present as well. And now look, if you're at home getting angry at what Femi's saying, Please don't. He represents a tiny extremist minority. The vast majority, huge majority of Britons are tolerant, open, decent people. We are, without doubt, the most tolerant country in the whole of Europe. We want racial equality and fairness in our society. What we don't want is a campaign that masquerades under Black Lives Matters, that effectively is a Marxist campaign to bring down this country, to end capitalism.
Laugh it up, fuzzball.
What's he laughing at? We have film of BLM leaders describing themselves as trained Marxists. If Nigel Farage described himself as a trained fascist, do you think Femi would hesitate for a second to paint Brexit as a fascist movement? He more or less does anyway.
Worst of all, their stated aim to defund the police force. And that is why...
I want to move on. We've talked about... Sorry to interrupt you, Femi. We've talked about Rule Britannia. I want to move on to Land of Hope and Glory, because it's both songs that the BBC have said will not be sung at the Proms.
And you did such a terrific job prosecuting the case against Rule Britannia. What was it? Anyone who sings it's a rapist or something. Now, Land of Hope and Glory is in a different league, okay? It's a great song. It's set to music by Elgar, who's arguably Britain's greatest composer, and the most popular rendition, of course, was sung by Vera Lynn, who was a wartime hero in many respects. Basically, if you've got a problem with Land of Hope and Glory, you're an idiot, okay? So, without any further ado, over to you, Femi.
Can you explain to our viewers what it is about the lyrics of Land of Hope of Glory? Because people might not think about actually what they're singing, they're just enjoying singing it. What is it that you object to and you think that should be left behind?
So again, if we're talking about this song specifically, the line about how our bounds are wider set still, the idea of increasing our territory, the idea of the UK as an empire constantly increasing its territory, might not sit so well with you if you live in Northern Ireland and you're on the nationalist side of things and believe that Northern Ireland should belong to Ireland as a united Ireland. That's kind of the point.
Oh yes, and Femi's always busied himself with protecting the feelings of the nationalists. He's all about that. Well, I think we can help them out there, Femi. If there's anyone from Northern Ireland who doesn't want to hear Land of Hope and Glory, you don't have to, okay? We're not going to execute you for not paying attention. Mute the telly, pop the kettle on, yeah? That's fine by me.
I'm sorry, you've just brought up Northern Ireland, my pet subject here. The Irish national anthem, which is called the Soldier's Song. Let me just read you some words from the Irish national anthem. Some have come from a land beyond the waves, sworn to be free. No more our ancient sire land shall shelter the despot or the slave. Do you have an issue with the word slave used in the Irish national anthem?
No, it says no longer shall our country shelter the despot or the slave.
Yeah.
And you need to explain the context of what they meant by that.
Yeah, I'm not sure that's going anywhere. Look, I can get you violent national anthems if that's your bag, baby. Ask Femi what he makes of Vietnam's Song of the Marching Army while you're there. Our flag, red with the blood of victory, bears the spirit of the country. And of course, their flag is actually red. The path to glory is built by the bodies of our foes. What is this? Sparta? The Turkish anthem is all about tears of blood and fighting the infidels. And don't get me started on the Italians.
I'm asking you, do you have an explanation of the context of it? Because every time the S word seems to be used, you have an issue with it.
Well, it's an issue within the context of the Rule Britannia on the basis that we were bragging about how we were in a position of enslaving other countries whilst not ourselves being enslaved.
You need to explain to me the context. We could go through the French national anthem, the Italian national anthem, the Portuguese national anthem, the Mexican national anthem. Do you think we should have an issue with national anthems in general, Nigel Farage?
No, look, we are all of us in our countries forged by our history. And there are parts of our history that we adore. And there are parts of our history that we're slightly ashamed of. And that is the same for every country in the world. I mean, goodness me, I tell you what, read out the words in English of the Marseillaise, the French national anthem. I mean, it's real blood and guts stuff.
It is. It's probably the greatest anthem of all time, actually. I mean, every verse of that is stand back, because you're about to get fucked up. Aux armes citoyens, formez vos bataillons, marchons, marchons, qu'un sang impur ébruve nos sillons. To arms, citizens, form your battalions, march on, may impure blood water our fields.
Sounds charming.
Look, the fact is, whatever you look back at in British history, we have been the country, above all, that has fought for liberty, that has fought for freedom, that has fought for religious tolerance, that has fought against slavery and made the rest of the world end it. We should be, not all of it, but let's be proud of our culture, our history, our past, and let's stop these extremists like Femi from trying to tear it down.
And I think that's a good place to wrap up, don't you? There's another controversy put to bed. Nigel's right. I am right. Femi is an oxygen thief. Apparently, the BBC have confirmed the return of both Rule Britannia and Land of Hope and Glory, lyrics and all, next year. You know, it's funny, because once they were effectively bullied into a U-turn on this, they said, well, we'll have the songs, but without the lyrics. The excuse being that there won't be an audience this year, and both anthems are traditionally sing-alongs. And I'm like, yeah, but they don't have to be. You could just have the choir sing them. So I guess unless they remove the lyrics to every song this year, we'll know they were talking shies. Not that I even care anymore, to be honest. I mean, the way I see it, the defund the BBC campaign is still very much alive. Stop subsidising the anti-British Broadcasting Corporation, and then they can do what they like. Adieu.
I had a number of thoughts. I think the first thing to say is that the evil atrocities of the Atlantic slave trade and Britain's role in them is a stain, a deep stain in our history that we can never erase. We can't get away from it. We were at the centre of it. We weren't the only ones, but we played an appalling role in that terrible, terrible trade. But Rule Britannia is not about that. Rule Britannia was first performed in a play that was about the Vikings invading Britain and Britain being enslaved. It came out at a time when the Barbary pirates were enslaving around 1 million Europeans, including people who lived in Cornwall and Devon. So it's not about the Atlantic slave trade. And the other thing I would say is that in the end, many years later after the song was written, if it hadn't been for Rule Britannia, the Royal Navy would not have been strong enough to begin to eradicate the Atlantic slave trade, devoting many ships to doing so, taking many casualties, fleeing 150,000 African slaves en route to North and South America. So we were part of a terrible venture, but we were also, at least some consolation, part of a change in the way we looked at things that helped to put that right. And we did it at a time when our country faced invasion from France. And yet we sent 1/6 of the Royal Navy to West Africa to wipe out the slave trade. I'm ashamed of what happened before, and I'm quite proud of what happened then.